Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's conversation in the ENAiBle speaker series. I'm Paul Pangaro. I'm co-founder of ENAiBle and professor of practice in the Human-Computer Interaction Institute, which is part of the School of Computer Science here at Carnegie Mellon. ENAiBle is an initiative of the School of Computer Science and the Tepper School of Business at CMU. We are a retail and service collaborative. Our mission is to create more humane, efficient, and positive retail and service experiences. We feel that ENAiBle is a unique forum for helping the retail and service industries meet the needs of their customers through advances in technology, specifically at the intersection of interaction design and organizational change. We hope that you're joining us again, but if not, welcome if you've come for the first time. We achieve this mission in part through events such as this, and also through roundtables on specific topics of direct interest to the industry. And we're building a community of practice that we feel, again, uniquely combines design and technology into a unified collaboration. And if there are specific areas you're interested in, please get in touch. You can do that and learn more at cmu.edu/ENAiBle, that's ENAiBle. A few logistics before we begin. Our speakers will have about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And it's intended to be a conversation, first among them, and then with all of us, all you participants. Please note, the event is on the record and is being recorded. If you'd like to pose a question, there's a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen that says Q&A. Please post your question there at any point, and we'll put it in the queue and open it up for Q&A after the main discussion. So let me introduce our speakers for today. First, Andrew Lee, co-founder of ENAiBle and assistant professor at the Tepper School of Business here at CMU. Andrew, can you please say a few words about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've basically spent my entire career so far working in this field called operations research. For everyone in the audience, if you've not heard of operations research, I promise that's actually quite normal. It just means that I think a lot about the mathematical approach to decision-making. In particular, I'm interested in those types of questions in e-commerce and in personalized medicine.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And our guest speaker for today, we're very happy to have Alan Montgomery, one of ENAiBle's associated faculty and also professor of marketing at the Tepper School of Business. He also has a courtesy appointment in the machine learning department in the School of Computer Science, all here at CMU, of course. Alan, again, could you please introduce yourself, and then Andrew will kick it off.
Sure. Thank you again, Paul and Andrew. As Paul mentions, my titles carry both in the business school as well as the School of Computer Science, and really illustrates my interest. It's at the intersection between business and machine learning. I have spent a lot of time trying to help businesses optimize pricing and promotional decisions, or predict how consumers are going to behave online, or more recently trying to understand consumer financial decision making. The reason that I was drawn to this intersection is that I had huge data sets and I wanted to try to build adaptive models. So to me, those were both features that I found solutions to in ML, which is how do you analyze unstructured data and how do you build models that learn, which is also a goal for AI.
Thanks, Alan. So I guess we can dive right in. The theme of today, right, is about kind of this intersection between AI and marketing. You've been at the center of this intersection for the better part of 3 decades now. So I want to start simple. In your view, what are AI and marketing all about?
Sure. I would say that both of the terms are used, I don't know, incorrectly or optimistically. So the problem with marketing is oftentimes it's used pejoratively, right? Like it's all about getting people to do things that they shouldn't be doing. It's advertising, and AI, a lot of people don't understand it or they don't define it well. So all of a sudden it becomes all my aspirations and everything's going to be fixed by AI. Here's a non-technical definition of how I view AI. It's about building models that can make decisions and behave like people or human decision makers would. So if I think about the best part of human decision making is that they're adaptive, they learn from examples, and they can also solve problems that have very limited input. Okay, so if I think about the objectives for AI and then I shift over to marketing, it turns out marketing is really not that different. Okay, sure. Marketing usually means that I'm going to focus on pricing and promotion and design and distribution decisions. But ultimately, as a marketer, what I want to do is help consumers solve problems. So as a consequence, I look at data, I use data to try to model consumer behavior. So if I start thinking about the kind of models that I want to build, it's just like AI. I'm trying to build models that predict the way that consumers make decisions. I guess the big difference for me is that for AI people, they want to have a test, like the Turing test, to try to figure out, has my AI achieved what a human decision maker would do? On the other hand, from a marketing standpoint, that's actually not my goal, because I find that oftentimes consumers don't make very good decisions. I find that consumers are sort of lazy decision makers. And I don't mean that as a criticism that, that they're awful at decision making. What I mean is that consumers are confronted by a massive amount of information, and there's opt-in and nudges and binging behavior. So just step back and ask yourself, does it really make sense to watch 8 seasons of Game of Thrones in one weekend? Probably not. So my point is that oftentimes consumers make bad decisions, and what I would aspire to is to figure out how AI could help people make better decisions.
So let me try to, I imagine many times in our coming conversation, I'm going to do the following, which is to try to summarize, to restate, right, what you said in a way that I think I try to understand, right? So I think this is pretty deep already, right? So AI is trying to mimic or get as close to as possible human decision-making. I guess decision-making is that key word, right? AI is trying to get as close as possible to human decision-making as possible, because there are just settings where, actually we could argue most settings, humans are pretty good, right? When we move to marketing, we end up in this kind of special case, this special world where when we view these humans or when the humans are consumers, okay, partly we're trying to mimic or predict what humans are going to do, but what we find is that, strangely enough, they're not often making the best decisions. And you might actually have this loftier goal of prescription in some way, right? Of kind of steering the consumers to better decisions. Somewhere there, you mentioned some examples, and I'm going to try to keep us tethered to reality through all of this. You mentioned examples like Optin and Nudge. Could you dive into maybe one of those, just so that we kind of have something concrete at all times?
Sure. So I participated in a study a long time ago about opt-in. It turns out that if you ask people, do you want to donate your organs? So if you think about your driver's license, if I ask the question in that way, only about 15% of people will make that decision, which is bad, right? We know that organ donation is really important. On the other hand, if the box is already checked off, then 90% of people will agree to donate their organs. So just a small change in a checkbox has a huge repercussion on the way that people will approach the decision. So it's pretty clear from a marketing standpoint, why does Netflix automatically renew my subscription every month? It's because they want me to opt in, and they want to frame that question of not should I continue, but what is that's going to motivate me to log in, cancel my account. So that's what I have in mind, that we just think about the way that consumers behave, and we oftentimes idealize consumers as incredible decision makers, but we just live in a really a complex environment where we're inundated by a massive amount of information.
I love it. I love it. So that's I want to, you know, if you're reading kind of popular science articles about AI today, right? What you read about is AI has conquered kind of chess or the game of Go, or is learning to play video games, right? I think there's a perfect example of kind of well, where the humans that AI is trying to mimic are not even doing the kind of right things, right? The kind of when you look at consumers and how they behave, we get lost, or we're no longer convinced that human is that human is the gold standard. So I like this definition, right? I think again that the key word there was decision making, right? So we can kind of stay on that. So now looking at if AI is about getting to human decision making, if marketing is getting to consumer decision making, again, I want to draw on, you've been working in this area for 3 decades. Can we think about just going into the past now, right? Going from past to present, right? Say, the 80s, let's say, up until now. What has that looked like, right? Just to set us up in terms of background. What has that looked like 80s up until the year 2021?
Okay, so just to level set, I can't answer the 80s because that's actually before my time, but I started my dissertation in the 90s, maybe late 80s. So I'll fudge a little, but my experience is that when I was working on my dissertation in the 80s and 90s, it was all about getting data. So the challenge from a marketing standpoint is that everything was at aggregate level. So I would be making all kinds of decisions about advertising and pricing and promotional strategies. And I would get one aggregate piece of information at the end of the quarter about what were my sales. Did they go up? Did they go down? And then from that, I had to make a multitude of decisions. So what I saw in the 80s and 90s is that all of a sudden you get optical scanners that are coming online, and now we have massive amounts of data. And this is true largely in a consumer packaged good and retail environment. By the 2000s, that's where a lot of the e-commerce solutions started coming online. But just pause and ask yourself the question, did we start collecting all this data to make marketing decisions? The answer was no. It was because we wanted to try to optimize inventory. Inventory is a huge cost, and it was just all about, let's try to optimize these costs that we have. So in the 2000s, there was this big shift towards e-commerce. And what I saw is that the reason we wanted to move to e-commerce is because it's just much more efficient. Oftentimes, one computer is talking to another. So instead of having the consumer talk to a computer and then have that information transcribed, why not just figure out a way for one computer to talk directly to another? But there's also a strategic change that I saw happen in the 2000s, which is that we have customer-centric strategies like CRM and interactive marketing. And I know all the way back in the 60s, marketers were talking about creating value and customer-centric strategies, but it wasn't really until the 2000s that we were able to come up with a way of talking individually with each customer. So then in the 2010s, all of a sudden, you've got all this unstructured data that comes, some of it from consumers talking to themselves, as well as consumers are talking to marketers. So for example, I go to Amazon and I write a review about a product so all my friends can read it. So the problem I saw in the 2010s is, how do we transform all this unstructured data to help make marketing decisions? So this is where machine learning came in, and I think has made wonderful contributions to where we're headed. Okay, so that sort of summarizes my 30 or 40 years of knowledge about marketing.
Ellen, for just for clarification, so the unstructured was a word that I think might be in the kind of technical category. What is unstructured data?
So unstructured data is all that data that doesn't have nice structures or tabular forms. Scatter data is a nice table. I have each transaction, and then I have another column that tells me the price, the quantity, and a UPC lookup, right? So I've got a nice database. Unstructured data are things like, here's a review. So I've got a bunch of words that are posted, or here's an image that someone posted of their B&B, and now they're offering it through Airbnb, and I'm trying to figure out, will people rent this or not? So now I've got graphical and visual information. I could also have links between consumers. So this person knows this person, and I actually observe the network. I know who's talking to each other through messages and tweets and all kinds of other enabled communication. So that's what I mean by unstructured data. It's just data that is difficult to deal with because it's not quantified. We've got to figure out a way to quantify that data.
So this is good. So if I can try to summarize, so we were in put ourselves somewhere in the 80s. We're in a spot where data is just scarce. Any kind of data, right? The kind of setting where like a firm's data fit in a spreadsheet, right? Somewhere along the way, between say late 80 to early 2000s, that changes in the sense that our spreadsheets grow, our numerical data grows, our structured data grows. And where we're at right now is we've leveraged all of that, right? And what you had hit on in the 2010s, right, was that, I mean, in some ways there's an embarrassment of riches, right? There's plenty of structured tabular data. And you'd like to actually use the other data that you're collecting, which is messy, which looks like sentences that people are writing about products, right? Which looks like actual image files. And it sounds like that's where it felt like we were in the middle of a story, right? It didn't feel like it felt like the story had begun and maybe it hadn't ended yet, right? And maybe that's where we're at. To kind of get us to maybe this might be the most pointed way to ask this. Again, putting now, let's stay on the theme of successes. What have been the greatest hits of let's say the last 10 years, right? Still, so artificial intelligence, marketing, decision making. What do you think of as a or a few of the examples of kind of the successes of, let's say, the last 10 years, of the 2010s?
Okay. So again, if I step back 10 or 20 years, I think about what marketing looked like, and then I think about where we're at right now. There are a lot of methods that are commonplace, a lot of data sets that are commonplace that we just didn't have before. So voice recognition, when I was young, this was going to be the ability of computers to digitize and understand voice and speak back to people. That was a pipe dream 20 years ago, but now voice recognition is really good. And I couldn't imagine running a call center without having voice recognition. I could think about adapting websites automatically. So as people are browsing through, I'm collecting massive amounts of information. And sometimes the web companies know us better. Every time I start thinking about what I'm going to post, I put it in, and sometimes Google has more insights about what I'm thinking at that point in time than my wife does. I could think about predicting customer churn. So sure, we knew about customer churn, but now we've got individual data, so we can go back and look at each customer. We can build classification models or more sophisticated things. So this is sort of bread and butter now in consulting. So this is really commonplace. Or I could use text mining to try to help understand how do consumers perceive a brand, a product? Why will they buy this product? I can look and find sentiment. So these are all things that have happened in the last 10 years. I think the intent of your question is to start thinking about where are we right now and what are the next 10 years going to look like. So another thing that I see coming up is reinforcement learning. It's very popular. And this is just trying to say that consumers are in a dynamic environment. And the choices that they're making today impact what they're going to do in the future. So let's think about using reinforcement modeling in marketing. So I think that's coming online. So I wouldn't say that's a greatest hit, but I think it has the potential to become a greatest hit in the next 10 years. So as I think about where we're at right now and where I think we're going to head, we have data, we have these sophisticated learning algorithms, and then the other thing that's going to enable this last step is a business strategy that says we can make use of these personalized, individualized efforts, and we wrap them all together. And to me, that's where the value lies as a marketer.
So I love this, and the I think where we're at right now, I'm gonna speak as kind of the absolute naive audience, right? Which is that it actually sounds like every single problem has been solved, based on where we're at in the conversation right now. Which is to say that I had kind of challenged you to give examples of what we can do with data that doesn't fit into spreadsheet form, right? And you kind of, in some way, listed everything under the sun. So when I'm going to challenge in the other direction, right, in the hopes of arriving at kind of where the line is in terms of where we are today, what is possible and what is impossible. What I'm going to ask now, in terms of bad news, is kind of what is impossible today, right? Again, it sounded like you gave amazing examples of what is possible today that wasn't even possible 5 years ago. What are some of the things that are not possible today?
Okay, so putting on my professorial hat, I need to make it look like I know all the solutions, right? Otherwise, people won't come to my classes and they won't sponsor projects with me.
Sure.
But I will be honest, there are many things that we don't know how to do. And I think the reason that we don't know how to do them is that there are just limitations in understanding how consumers make decisions. Now, again, I don't want to try to say that we don't know anything about consumer decision making. We know a lot. But one thing we would have to be able to do is to be able to get AI to mimic consumer behavior. And in a lot of models that I build, what I find is that there's a signal and there's a noise component, and oftentimes the noise component is bigger than the signal component. So what that means is that if I'm trying to figure out what kind of product people will buy, sure, I can give you a guess, but my guess might be 50% right, 50% wrong. So there's a lot of error in the predictions that we make. I'm trying to figure out, will this consumer or will this business stay around or will they churn? And I take my proverbial coin out and flip it and try to take a guess at, will the customer last or not? So you're asking me, what is it that we don't know well? And what I'm alluding to is that there are a lot of things that consumers are doing that we can't automate right now, or we can't do in place of consumers. Also, from a marketing manager's standpoint, I also find that we have limitations in trying to get managers to use these AI models. So to me, there are two challenges for us. So first, we want to get AI models to help consumers to make better decisions. So not just allow them to mimic, but to actually help improve. And then the other thing is we want to get marketing managers to use these AI models as well. So the challenge for these AI models is that managers live in the real world. And I just am finishing up supervising some projects for our Masters of Analytics in Business. There are several projects that we've done, and they're all related to the COVID intervention. So I'm Campbell Soup, and I want to try to figure out what are my sales going to look like in the next year. And clearly, COVID has intervened, and the behaviors that I see right now look a lot different than a year ago or a year from now. So machine learning models work really well when I have massive data sets and I see events over and over again. But now I have to be able to start bringing in some knowledge that managers have. So like, why did soup sales go up? Well, people are staying at home and they're cooking more in their kitchens. Uh, so those insights don't always come through in the data sets. I can have them. So I need to try to figure out ways of taking those insights and making sure that they come inside my model.
So I really like this. There's kind of a division you pointed out between in marketing, right? The decisions made by consumers and the decisions made by marketing managers. And I want to kind of I want to split that. I want to start with the consumers. You'd started with I think you just started with, and I want to give you the opportunity to keep going on that example. Decision making from the consumer perspective, and in particular, this lofty goal, right? That's been brought up from the very beginning. This lofty goal of helping consumers make decisions, right? I think this is a nice place to draw a line here. What's kind of what are you excited about in that direction, right? In the direction of helping of AI kind of helping consumers make decisions, right? Where consumers were actually turns out not great decision makers, right? And there's opportunity to help there. What are the examples or general areas that kind of excite you moving forward?
Sure. So one of the projects that I'm working on right now is trying to build a machine learning model of how consumers are making decisions. Specifically, this is with a big bank that has prepaid credit card data. So we chose prepaid credit card customers because we think that a lot of these customers are using this card as their primary banking mechanism. Your finances are pretty complicated because you've got retirement accounts, you make lots of money, you have investment portfolios, you've got probably half dozen credit cards, so that's complicated. So what we really wanted to do is start thinking about the underbanked consumers. Roughly a quarter of American consumers are what I would describe as underbanked. That means that they don't have good access or they have very limited access to conventional banking. Okay, so here's the data that we have. We see all the things that people are buying with their prepaid cards. So that gives us an ability to try to forecast out what are the kind of purchases that they're likely to make in the future. Now, economists would go back and start making assumptions like people are rational, they're making the right decisions at every point in time. On the other hand, psychologists or behavioral economists would go back and start saying, no, that's not really the way that people behave. The behavioral economists have this notion of mental counting. So the way that I will spend $100 that I get from the government in a COVID incentive program is very different than $100 that I get in salary versus the way that I'll spend $100 if I find it on the ground or $100 winning at the lottery. To an economist, $100 is the same in each one of those contexts, so it doesn't matter, at least in the economic model. So what we're trying to do is build this model of mental accounting that says that people tag the way that they earn and spend money to different types of accounts. So using our more sophisticated algorithms, we're able to find out that, yeah, it actually looks like some people behave in this way. It's not a simple story. It's not like everyone is a pure mental counters, nor is everyone at the other extreme where they're just like economists assume. They fall somewhere in between, right? They oftentimes exhibit the slowness of trying to make changes. So our model can detect those things. So that the next step is not just detecting them or modeling them, but now trying to figure out what are some innovative financial services that we could bring to the consumer to help them make better decisions. So what if I advise the consumer about this is a good purchase or a bad purchase? I will be honest, not everyone likes these ideas. Some of my friends at the bank don't want to be big mother, and they're afraid that that's exactly the way that people are going to perceive them, that this big corporate giant is telling them how to spend their money. In truth, that's exactly what I do want to do. So I can give another example of where I think that trying to use AI to help people make better decisions could be really useful. So if I make $15 an hour and I'm thinking about what's a good nutritious meal to make today, that's very different than if I make $150 an hour. All right, so in both cases, we both eat food. It's just that I've got different opportunities if I make a lot of money versus little. I don't want to go overboard. I'm not going to eat 10 times as much. In fact, what you see is that people that make more actually eat better and are less overweight. So all of a sudden, we've got all kinds of companies like Blue Apron and HelloFresh that are coming in the market. So again, this is one of those marketing innovations that's enabled by e-commerce, and it's also individualized. So it's, again, taking advantage of all the data that you collect about consumers. So now, as a marketer, I could try to personalize, and it's not just appealing to what you've done in the past. I want to help you make better meals. So I'm going to send out instructions on meal preparation. I'm going to teach you something about nutrition. I'm going to help anticipate when you need the groceries. So it offloads a lot of the decision making from the consumer. So to me, this is a really exciting possibility in the next 10 years, which is that we can use AI to help consumers make better decisions. So again, this is what I'm excited about. And you asked me what I think the big challenge is. And the big challenge is that we don't really know how to do it. We have ideas of trying to integrate knowledge from a lot of different sources, but now we got to try to figure out bringing all these things together.
This is really great. So in particular, I think you've drawn on kind of two perfect examples where I think that the AI is doing its job in some sense, and there's kind of you could say, I want to use the phrase adoption issue, but that's incorrect. Adoption issue implies that the humans involved are against it, right? There's a non-trivial procedure that happens when kind of the AI has been properly developed, and it kind of needs to be, you could say, rolled into the operations, right? And that's something, I mean, that we've seen play out since let's call it the year 2000, right? It's just that our AI is more sophisticated now, and it kind of, if the question is how does the AI influence or get played out in kind of operational marketing decisions, that's kind of, that's the fun part. That's what our audience is excited about, right? In the few minutes that we have left, I want to talk. We're to our audience. We're talking to an academic here, right? And the fun is kind of where are we going, right? I think the fun is where are we going? What is not just the state of the art, but what does the next, let's say, 5 years look like? And Alan, I'm gonna restrict you to kind of 5 years, but what looks like it's about to be solved in the next 5 years? This I know is a tough question, because if somebody asked me that question in my own field, I would struggle a bit. So this is the most challenging question I'm going to ask you today. 2025, what are the things that you're going to say got solved in the last 5 years?
Okay, so you're absolutely right. This is a really impossible question to answer. I'll try to put it back in the context of the kind of problems that I'm working on. So one of the traditional marketing problems is that I've got to plan out a series of promotions. So let's put us back into a financial service perspective. So on the bank, I'm offering all kinds of different financial services. I start off with checking accounts, and hopefully that builds the relationship and makes it more likely that people use credit cards with me. The credit cards enable me to understand their behaviors, the purchases they're making, which hopefully will then lead to lending products where I make more money. And then the lending products lead me to investment products as the consumers mature and they make more money. Okay, so I've got a whole sequence of products and services that I want to offer customers. So I want to take all the data that I have available. And honestly, a lot of marketers just don't do a great job looking at that individual level model. They do know that certain offers at certain times are good, but how do I come up with a better overall solution? So what I'm looking at is to try to build a very adaptive model that says I can take all kinds of spending behaviors. I can build a very adaptive machine learning model known as Gaussian process. So this fits into an area known as Bayesian machine learning. So the reason I follow this is because I've got knowledge that I want to incorporate into these models. So as a manager, I know that I don't want to give people 20 emails all in one day. They're going to get irritated with me. Or I know that the right sequence of offers to make is it's much better to start with the deposit account and then when the consumer moves to a new area, make them that offer of a new demand deposit account or a checking account, then to have them start off with a car loan. So I know there are certain times of approaching people, what's the right circumstance. So what I'm interested in doing is taking that managerial knowledge and combine it together. So again, in my Bayesian framework, I can try to take all this information, bake it in together, but at the same time, I want to learn from the data. So if I find out that this isn't the way that people are making decisions, I can adapt away from it. So you asked me, what am I excited about? What is a problem that we can solve in, say, 5 years from now? So what I'm excited about is that we can take a massive amount of data. We can extract information from unstructured. So unstructured could be images, it could be spending data, but then we use that to figure out what are the right decisions that consumers should be making, and we figure out how as marketers to help intervene to lead consumers to the right decisions. Ultimately, marketing is about a collaborative approach where I want consumers to make better decisions, and I, as a marketer or a firm, I want to be able to offer those solutions to consumers. Ultimately, it's all about trying to solve problems, and that's what I'm really excited about, that we can fuse together lots of different types of data. We can build these very sophisticated adaptive algorithms that are dynamic and thinking about how today impacts tomorrow, which impacts the next month and the next year. And then I'm also interested in trying to figure out how can I go back and also fuse together knowledge or insights that I have. So I don't have to relearn everything. And unfortunately, that's what happens with a lot of ML, that you have massive data sets and you learn obvious things. Like if I increase prices, I decrease sales. Economists have been telling me that for 200 years. So that's not an insight. What I'm interested in is trying to find some things that I didn't know and avoid relearning all the things that I do know. So that goes back to AI. What AI is all about is trying to make decisions in an artificial way, an artificial context, build a model that can mimic consumer behavior or consumer decision making.
That's perfect. It sounded like the word transfer came to mind, right? As you're talking, as far as where we're going, right? Transfer in the sense of taking what has been learned by, well, humans, that's obvious, right? What's been learned by, I don't want to use the word machines, but that's what they are. They're machines, and kind of combining the two. It sounds, it sounds cartoonish, but that was basically what it sounds like where we're going. right? Which where I'm coming from, that's same feeling, right? That's where the excitement is. I don't want we promised kind of a certain end time, right? So I want to open up to audience Q&A, and Paul, if were there certain questions jump out?
Yes, we've had some wonderful questions. And in fact, one is a great segue to what Alan was saying a couple of sentences back, which is Bill asks, who defines what constitutes a better decision? So we want better decision making, but where do the criteria come from? How does that work?
Sure. So oftentimes the better decision in a marketing context is, okay, I just need to find the better deal, right? I need to find a lower price. But it's not as simple as that, because price is just one of the many elements of marketing mix. I can change the quality of the product. I could change the terms of the agreement. So there are a lot of decisions that could be made. So I think about better as blending together a lot of things to come up with a score of overall satisfaction or welfare or utility of how people are using things. Unfortunately, we don't have a utility meter that I can hook up to a consumer. So I'm always going to be in that dilemma of how do I infer what the better decision was for the consumer. On the marketing manager side, I think it's a little easier because we know that the marketing manager has a goal of maximizing long-term profits. So that's a little more comfortable from an optimization standpoint because I can measure and monitor profits. But at the same time, since the profits come from interfacing with the consumer, if I don't really understand the way the consumer is going to behave, even as a marketing manager, that comfortable optimization problem becomes a little less comfortable. So going back to Bill's question, who decides what's better? Well, it's really up to the consumer. So is the consumer happier using this AI, or are they happier not using the AI? Sometimes our decision is to convince them to use the AI. So if I'm Amazon and I have Alexa units sitting around my house, all of a sudden I know that I must have done something right because consumers are happier incorporating this AI into their decision making than without.
Right, so here's a related question from Shuming. What would be AI plus decision making for consumers? It's a close follow-on. At what stage of the funnel does it make sense to use AI?
All right, so I'll be a little controversial. I actually don't like the scheme that most marketers follow. So again, if you look at Google, it's an advertising-based model. And I think this is really bad. All we've done is we've enabled ourselves to generate more messages and we just inundate people, which leads people to making worse and worse decisions. Okay, so if I want to succeed here, I've got to try to figure out a way to get an agent to learn my preferences and act on my behalf in ways that are beneficial to me. So again, how do I do that? Probably good for a follow-up on that question.
Okay, many other questions coming in. Let's dive into some details here for the moment, and then maybe we can pop back out. Anand asks, typically in the real world, real qualified, air quotes, there is a lot of contextual data which consumers have that is very hard to capture for the AI. Is that still a problem?
Definitely. It's going to be a problem. So things like weather, things like economic conditions, things like, am I going to lose my job? All those come into play. And as I think about decisions like, should I go buy a car or not? So we can only measure so much. I always thought the solution was bigger and better data sets. But at some point, we realized that we can never collect every piece of information. So we're always going to have to abstract away and at some point say, look, this is enough information. That's what I'm going to have to be able to make my decision. So I think that inherently we're always going to have some uncertainty. I'm a statistician at heart, so uncertainty is not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that I have to make some trade-offs between the complexity and the amount of information I'm willing to have. So if I've got complete information, then I have a perfect model, but the model takes as much computing capacity as all the computers in the world, and that doesn't help me at all. So I have to figure out what are the trade-offs that we're willing to make about the contextual information and the decision-making. So can I distill down the really important things? And again, that's where managers and consumers do a great job that AI is not able to abstract and say, this is what's important. AI gets fooled right now. Oftentimes the reason that I know that this is a cat or this is a dog and this is not a fish is because of background information. So there's a bunch of spurious correlations that come up. So what we need to do is to have enough information to know about the context. I don't have to know complete information, but I have to know enough to make sure that I get good predictions.
Great.
Alan, I want to ask a follow-up. This is from the lens of what I think our audience is, right? I'm gonna, I want a proper preface to your answer to this question, which is that you will not be kind of held subject to this answer or kind of, there's no contract set up here. But what is enough data? Right? This is the question I want to ask. What is kind of enough data to do proper AI? And the reason that I've given you this long preface to say that you're not held to any answer is that a proper AI, enough data, these are not properly defined terms, right? But like, what is you meet frequently with companies that are looking to get kind of quick and done AI or quick and done sophisticated marketing in your role as kind of a capstone project leader, right? So just again, more generally, what is enough data to do proper AI? Loaded question, but I want to ask it.
Okay, in ML, the more data, the better. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the patterns and I'm going to be able to learn from those patterns. The more patterns I have, the better off I am. So if you ask me companies that are doing a great job at AI, I'll come up with the usual candidates like Google and Facebook and Amazon. And the reason is they have massive data sets. Okay, so does that mean that I can't do AI? Remember, I said ML. So now if I think about the AI, when I first started, AI had oftentimes rule-driven approaches. And the rules were meant to try to encapsulate the knowledge that consumers or managers have. So I think it's possible to still come up with wonderful systems with zero data. The question is, what is the knowledge that I have? If I already know enough and I can at least feed in not data in the sense of lots of examples to learn from, but data to help me understand the context that I'm making the decision in, then I think that's great. And I can see a lot of success. That also means that a lot of smaller companies can leverage their knowledge. And ultimately, that's what marketing is about, trying to solve problems. So if I can leverage the knowledge to solve those problems, I make money.
Andrew, shall I keep going with some questions in the Q&A?
Yeah, I'm going to propose we keep going. Paul, I'm gonna if you'll indulge me, there's one question I really liked in particular. I suspect Alan's gonna like this one too. There's a question having to do with interpretability and explainability. The reason why I'm glomming onto that is, as it turns out, on the academic side, that happens to be kind of a popular topic. So I want to just dive in. Let me just say the question, right? How important is interpretability and explainability of a machine learning / AI model to solving marketing problems?
Is it clear what explainability means, by the way? You may want to throw that in, Alan. Just
Yeah, and in fact, we'll go with your definition of interpretability and explainability.
Great.
Okay, I'll try to give a simple definition. Explainability is trying to be able to offer explanations about why I made the decision that I did. Interpretability is slightly different. The interpretability might come back and say that I need to be able to show the user how the model reached the decision. And I'm not going to say that these are the best definitions, but interpretability and explainability go to this black box problem that oftentimes we have in AI machine learning, that all of a sudden I don't know what's under the hood. I just have to tell you, trust me, and you'll know that I'm making the right decisions. So oftentimes I build a churn model and I have no idea about why the churn model is behaving the way that it is. And you give that to a manager, and then the manager says, I'm not going to use that. I need to be able to justify the decisions that I'm making. Or in a bank context, I can't use a black box to decide whether to give this individual a loan or not, because the black box might be doing things that are unethical, things like looking at gender and race and ethnicity. So those are big problems. So one of the reasons that I care about interpretability and explainability is to make sure that I'm doing good ethical decisions. I also want to make sure that I have the consumer or the firm's interest at heart. And if I just have this black box, I don't always know whether I'm getting back to it. So that's one of the reasons that I think this blending of knowledge and fusing it together is really important. But at the other extreme, sometimes I don't really care about the explainability. When I go to the doctor's office and my back is aching and I can barely stand, I don't need the doctor to give me a lecture about vertebrae and how I need to improve my posture. I need to do these. All I really want is the cure and the fix. I believe the doctor enough. So sometimes interpretability and explainability are overemphasized. There's a balance that we need to achieve.
I like it. So in particular, there's my takeaway was, I mean, there's the academic and there's the English version of interpretability and explainability. I think the kind of where we're at in terms of the everyman's definition is it's less an issue as it is in the academic community. But you should correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure. And from an academic perspective, what we often do is build simpler models to explain more complicated models. So the idea is that if I could just give you one or two variables that are important in this area of the space, I'm happy, and I think that that's an interpretable and explainable model. Honestly, I don't know whether that's the case. That's the academic solution. I think these black box models do have a place, but at the same time, there are reasons that I care more about interpretability. I've run into experiences where managers are trying to figure out whether my model works or not. And what they do is they start posing a lot of counterfactual questions. So what would you do in this circumstance or this circumstance? So they're just trying to test out. And I think that's the way we deal with employees. You hire someone, you try to test them in different circumstances. If they tend to make good decisions in those circumstances, you trust they'll make decisions like that in the future. So again, I'll turn it back to you to see where you want to follow up, or if you want to move on to a new topic.
Can I jump in for a second, gentlemen? Just quickly, why don't we put a bow on the first hour, and I'll make some closing remarks for those who need to go at 3 p.m., because I know some will. And then we'll come back around and answer more questions in the chat and keep going a little bit. So it's traditional just to thank everyone for coming and to say that we have another ENAiBle event coming up in late May. The date's pending, but the last week. The topic is enhancing the customer experience, hype versus reality. And we'd like you to walk away from that with a better understanding of the benefits and the limitations of AI, specifically for customer experience in retail and service. If you're on our mailing list, you're all set, you'll get that. If not, please write to us. Also, we want to welcome Zendesk as an official sponsor of ENAiBle. We're pleased to announce that. And our special thanks to Chris Stevens, VP of Enterprise Data and Analytics of Zendesk, for his support. Sponsors of ENAiBle get targeted roundtables that can be focused on specific interests of theirs, tailored recruitment, other ways of getting closer to the CMU academic world and research world. So we invite you to look into sponsorship. It's all on the website, cmu.edu/ENAiBle. And of course, supporting in general the community of design and technology-minded experts, we feel is a valuable contribution. And we look forward to your feedback about that and your potential participation. But let's roll back. Let's come back to some questions, and we can keep going for as long as, gentlemen, you have, probably another 20, 30 minutes at most. There are many questions here. Andrew, did you have one next, or you want me to pick one?
There's one that I like. It's already a tough one. I define tough because I know, Alan, you're not going to be able to give a concrete answer. So here's one. No concrete answer expected. What industry needs the most help or would benefit the best from an AI implementation? I assume we're in the marketing context here, right?
That's a hard question. I spent a lot of time working in retail. So obviously I could say, well, retail can use AI, and they do. They use AI in the store. They use AI behind the store. They use AI in the front office. They use AI in connecting to consumers. So, the simple answer is that all industries will benefit. If I try to delve a little deeper into where the AI is being used in each of those circumstances, like I can use AI in the store to stock the shelves. I can have robots that go around and make sure that items are placed properly. Sometimes it may not even be a robot that actually stocks the shelves. It's just one that can detect errors, or there's a missing product, or we've got a stock out, or we've got the proverbial mess on aisle 5, so I can alert somebody else to come in. So that's where AI could be used. AI could be used in terms of putting cameras up, and we can now fixate on eye movement, so I can keep track of everybody as they're walking through the store. So I don't even have to ask people to provide me detailed information using loyalty cards. I can get that already. So that's exciting because I get all kinds of new data. I'm also excited about dynamic loyalty offers outside of the store. So I could figure out when and how to make offers to consumers. And I know I'm doing this in a competitive world. So if I can do a better job of convincing the consumer than my competitor, so this is where I can leverage the knowledge that I have about the consumer, then I can do better and they keep coming back to me. So again, retail obviously is an easy one, but I wouldn't stop there. I gave examples in financial services where I think a lot of people just make bad decisions. And I should be careful. Bad, like what's the optimal portfolio allocation right now for my risk portfolio and my anticipated length of time? So that's a finance problem, or one that finance people would answer for us. But how do I get consumers to understand when most of them don't understand betas, they don't understand risks, they don't quantify these things? A lot of consumers just grapple with this question of what does 1% mean? 1% is pretty close to 0, so I shouldn't worry about it. But then all of a sudden you have a vaccine where there's a 1 in a million chance that the vaccination could cause death. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to take it. So again, this is an overreaction, at least in my view, of how consumers should be making decisions. So if you go back to where can AI help, I think AI can help in all contexts. It's natural for me to talk about the ones that I know the best, but I talk to managers in a lot of other industries. I could easily be talking about Boeing or GM and talking about how AI could be used to monitor parts. And instead of consumers having to go back and do maintenance after the fact, maybe I could anticipate when maintenance needs to be done. And instead of giving set schedules, I could do it in a lot more intelligent manner. So that makes consumers happier. It makes the firms better off. It's a more efficient process. So that's the proverbial win-win. And I would think that's what we want to look for. So anywhere we get the win-win is a good place for AI. And my guess is all industries will benefit, some more than others. And I think the ones that'll benefit more are the ones that have structures in place that there's a mentality in the company that they're willing to learn. I know it's shocking, but if you ask a survey of 100 CMOs or C-level executives, is your firm a good analytics company? 2/3 of them will respond no, that they think that they need to improve. I know it's shocking, but that was a recent Harvard Business Review publication where they went back and surveyed, and a lot of companies still feel like they just don't have an analytics mentality within the company.
Okay, so I want to so I want to go in two directions, and what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna insist actually, we're gonna go in one direction, stop, and then go in the other direction. And to the folks that have asked questions, I promise we're going in the questions first. So let me so Alan, to you, I've got what I think is the toughest question coming, and it's a conglomerate of questions that were asked by the audience, including Dave and Ivan. So here's the toughest part of all of this. All of this has been about decision making. Every example so far in terms of consumer decision making has, I think our audience would agree, is of the flavor that the consumer is making the wrong decision, for them and for society, and that gets corrected. There's a weird kind of middle ground where the optimal decision for a consumer does not exactly mesh with the optimal decision, let's say, for society, right? So when we get into kind of the ethics of AI, let's say, and that's in an academic sense loaded as well. But where do we go when now there's not two parties, there are three parties, right? There is the marketer, there is the consumer, and there is, frankly, society at large. I'm going to purposely leave this question vague because, Alan, it's not your job to solve this, but how do you think about this?
Okay, so one of the applications of the dynamic loyalty project that I'm working on is to say, sometimes consumers are making decisions like they're overeating. Can I help consumers to avoid overeating? And the answer is, I think we can. Consumers respond well to incentives and arguments. So understanding what are the right incentives or the right arguments to make at a point in time mean that if I could line these two things up, then society benefits as well. I think we can end up in situations where consumers are happier, firms are happier, and it has positive benefits to society. I don't think this is a panacea. There are always going to be some examples of illicit drug use or pollution that some of these externalities just are not captured well in market economies. So as a consequence, I can't solve all the world's problems from this. And I didn't mean to imply that I think consumers make awful decisions. I actually think consumers make the right decisions in most of the contexts. All I'm saying is that there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and can we push them to make a slightly better choice? So I'll go back to my consumer experience. I go to the store, I buy a camera, and what's the right camera for me? Well, there are hundreds of items out there, and I make a good choice. I made a decision. All I'm trying to say is that could I have found out of those hundreds of alternatives one that would have been a little better? And if it's a little better for me, then that means that I would have been a little happier. And as a consequence, hopefully the market and the consumer are better off. But it's a really interesting question about trying to think about how the broader society comes into play. Right now, we've got carbon taxes. So maybe as these carbon taxes are made more efficient or more effective, they would have an impact. But again, that starts veering off in something. I think it's, I didn't mean this to be a policy discussion. As an AI-enabled marketing scheme, I think we can create the win-win for consumers as well as for marketers. And I think we definitely can do that in areas that society will like, that help incentivize. I can be a little bit concrete, but I can leave it there as well.
No, I like that, and I think, I mean, that's the topic of we could fill separate hours, and worse, probably 10 years from now we'll be filling such hours on this. Let's not try to fill it in kind of the extra time of such a discussion.
Where I was going to head is I've got another project on fashion. So fashion is an interesting problem because you've got a $300 billion industry in the US, trillions if I go globally. And what usually happens is that I have fashions that are created overseas. It takes months to ship them and go through the process. It's very carbon intensive. It's very resource intensive. But it's the cheapest way to do that right now. And part of the problem is I can't anticipate what people are going to like. And sometimes people can't anticipate what they're going to like. Fashion changes regularly. So in this problem, we're taking ML to scan through images on social media to figure out what people are wearing. Then I can help the retailer and the consumers line up what are fashions that are likely to be used and watched. And that helps eliminate some of the waste that's in the system. So this is an example. If you make marketing more efficient, it tends to have positive effects in the entire supply chain.
Nice. And I think it's a good example, but it sounds like something that kind of requires its own separate I don't know, source of attention, if you want, for the sake of kind of staying on a single topic, and it's only to keep you know, this program at some reasonable length. I want to end with maybe one question that we get, Alan, from our audience members all the time, which is that I'm going to say this is the question we hear. Right. So I am a company, right? Or I'm at a company. I want to engage with academia. What are the options that are available?
Great. So you've already taken the first step, the audience, that is, that are engaged in listening. So lots of great questions, discussions. So if you go back to cmu.edu/ENAiBle, ENAiBle, then that gives you a link back to this kind of program. So I think this is a great way to try to interact. Honestly, research thrives by interacting with practitioners. It's no fun for me to work on problems if they're not going to have an impact. the reason that I choose the problems that I do is that I think maybe 5 or 10 years out, they can have an impact in the way that marketing is done. So another thing that helps are research partnerships. So these partnerships could be funded. So a company comes to me and says, this is what I need solved. I say, great, we'll use all kinds of resources at the university. So that's where funding comes into play. Other times it's that we already have a problem that we want to solve, but we lack data. And sometimes research partnerships are about providing data or insights. So they can be unfunded as well. And then the last place where I think it's great to interact are capstone projects. So I personally am head of the Masters in Business Analytics program. So as I mentioned, I recruit teams to projects, usually starting in August. So if you're interested, send me an email. I will follow up with you in August because we'll start looking for projects where we assign a team of students in our analytics program with a sponsor. Now, I am not unique in my role as head of the Masters in Business Analytics program. There are all kinds of really great analytics programs. So there's computational machine learning, computational data science programs. There's practical statistical programs. There's information technologies. I could go on. There are all types of capstone projects, and the important thing is that the capstone projects have a short span versus research relationships that might go over a long term. So I can think of several different ways to get started, and I really value the interaction that we get with companies. So by all means, send an email, pick up the phone, or however you want to communicate, or go back to ENAiBle. And I think these are great ways of starting this.
Thanks, Alan. I want to take this as it feels like a nice moment to kind of break out and wrap up.
Great, Andrew. Thanks, Andrew and Alan, for coming today and having this great conversation. Just the quickest wrap up. Thanks to everyone for coming. You can find us at cmu.edu/ENAiBle. You can also write to ENAiBle@cmu.com if you'd like, at cmu.edu if you'd like to get on our mailing list and learn more about sponsorship. The events that we've had in the past are at our website. You can also go to Google and say ENAiBle CMU, and those two keywords will get you to us. Thanks to everyone, especially those behind the scenes, Kenny Blair, Laura Alfred, Chris Kissel, and of course, our sponsors at ENAiBle. So thanks very much, Andrew, Alan, thank you. See you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks all.